Hello, my name is Kathy Day. I'd like to tell you about my father, John McCleary's final healthcare journey. Dad was living at home independently with my mother, his wife of 62 years. He drove his own car, did his own errands, and had a hearty appetite. He visited with my family 70 miles from his home just a week before his final fall. He had COPD, and he had begun to have difficulty with falls. A few of these falls had resulted in minor injuries, but none had required hospitalization. He walked with a cane. On September 26, 2008, Dad fell getting out of bed. Unfortunately, he fractured his distal fibula, and that required rehabilitation. So he was admitted to his rural hospital for 12 days of rehab. The local nursing home didn't have a rehab program, and the alternative would have been a distant facility. My family was so relieved that he could stay in his hometown hospital that they had always used and trusted. This was the very same hospital where I started my nursing career. Dad worked very hard to rehabilitate, and then he was discharged to home in good condition on October 7, 2008. He walked into his home with only the assistance of a walker. On October 9th, less than 2 full days later, Dad woke up with a high fever and profound weakness. He couldn't sit up in bed. He never walked again. He was taken by ambulance and readmitted to his hospital. His admitting diagnosis was pneumonia and rule out heart attack. Within 24 hours, he went into sepsis. He was moved to ICU, and he endured the following: numerous diagnostic studies, blood cultures, lung scans, EKGs, and so on. He had a fluid challenge, blood transfusions, and a nurse inserted a urinary catheter, and when she did, she proclaimed he would get an infection from this. The evening after he went into sepsis, Dad was given last rites. This was the most frightening day of his hospitalization for my mother and for my family. I don't think Dad ever realized how precarious his condition was that day. He always figured he could beat an infection. Dad, true to his Irish-French heritage, was a strong, determined man, and he survived this initial crisis. On October 12th, 3 days after the catheter insertion, MRSA showed up in a urine culture. So I requested a sputum culture. 3 days later, on October 15th, his sputum culture showed MRSA, pneumonia, and he started 14 days of IV vancomycin. He was already isolated and on contact precautions, but now we used masks as well. Dad's appetite completely disappeared, so he had a steady and alarmingly rapid weight loss. He became very anxious, depressed, and even confused at times. The vancomycin antibiotic treatment caused Dad the side effects of a body-wide itchy rash, painful thrush of the mouth and throat, and ototoxicity, which is hearing loss. On October 29, 2008, he was declared ready for transition to long-term care. A hospital nurse apparently called an alarming report about Dad's condition to the local nursing home. The bed that my mother and the social worker had reserved 2 weeks earlier for my father was suddenly not available. Tense conversations ensued, and eventually a bed did become available. There were 3 admission conditions. Number 1, he would have to accept hospice. Number 2, he would have to pass the Gould assessment, which is the routine assessment done for all patients entering long-term care. And number 3, he would have to stay in his room unless he wore a mask, because he would remain colonized with MRSA indefinitely. We agreed to all 3 conditions. It was very important to keep Dad close to Mom. This long-term care center was only 5 minutes from their home. Dad spent 9 long weeks in a single isolation room. The only reason he wanted to leave the room was to go home. It never happened. His health continued in a downward spiral. Physical therapy was tried, but Dad fainted, so the therapist quit. His weight dropped to about 125 pounds on his 6-foot frame. The skin broke down on his sacrum, and it started to break down on his shoulder blades, his heels, and the tips of his toes. Other than changing the channel on his TV, Dad was too weak to do anything. Some days he couldn't even sip water through a straw. He became a shadow of his former handsome self. Dad died early morning, January 9th, 2009, with my mother and me by his side. His death was a peaceful release from his withering body. Although we were very sad, we knew he could not continue on this way. This shouldn't happen to anyone. I channeled my grief and frustration over Dad's preventable infection to my work to improve MRSA prevention in the state of Maine. I do this work to help others in his honor and his memory.